right, good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining us today for Alan Meltzer CEO Speaker Series session here at COGOD. Thank you, Mr. Meltzer, for being here. My name is Caroline Stacy. I'm an MBA candidate here at COGOD, as well as a senior project manager at a local sports consultancy called Canopy Team. I came to COGOD for opportunities like this, to not only learn about, but to engage in conversations surrounding the business and growth of sports. So I'm incredibly grateful to be here introducing our guest speaker today. I not only have the wonderful opportunity in my professional life to work for the woman who originally designed Camden Yards, but I've had the chance to make my own mark on the ballpark with the original moving back of the left field wall. Today I have the honor of introducing the visionary who's at the helm of reimagining not only Camden Yards, but the entire Orioles organization and brand, an inspiring leader in business and sports, Catie Griggs. Catie currently serves as the Orioles President of Business Operations, overseeing all aspects of the organization's business strategy. This includes revenue, local broadcasting through Masson, fan engagement, community partnerships, and the enhancement of both the Orioles brand and the Camden Yards experience. Before joining the Orioles, Catie led the Seattle Mariners as President of Business Operations, guiding the team to record-breaking fan engagement and success both on and off the field. Prior to that, she was the Chief Business Officer for the Atlanta United of Major League Soccer, helping build the expansion franchise into the league's most dynamic and successful clubs. Earlier in her career, Catie held the leadership roles with Turner Broadcasting and Futures Sport and Entertainment, where she led strategy, business operations, and organizational development. A native of North Carolina, Catie earned her undergraduate degree in government from Dartmouth College and went on to receive her MBA from Dartmouth's Tuck School of Business. Throughout her career, Catie has been recognized for her thoughtful, people-centered approach to leadership, as well as her dedication to growing strong, innovative brands and creating lasting impact within organizations and communities alike. Please join me in welcoming Catie Griggs.
Thanks for being here. Thanks, Caroline. Great job. I predict that Caroline will, at some point in the near future, be president of another team. So remember us, and we'll look forward to the Stacy Speaker Series, and you can replace Alan's Speaker Series. But Alan, thank you for being here. I know Alan has to leave early, but thanks for being here. Very excited to have just a wonderful leader. And I'll ask questions for 35 or 40 minutes and then open it up to all of you. So let me start by, how many of you are O's fans? All right, this side of the room.
The rest of you guys will join us by the end of this day. It'll be fine.
Okay. As I do for all of these, I learned as much I could about you, listened to podcasts with A-Rod. I listened to your graduation speech at Dartmouth, and there were two things that struck me about your speech that I want to ask you about. The first was that you said when you went to business school, you had absolutely no idea what you wanted to do, and you thought that was an advantage. And I thought that was pretty cool because when I went to school, I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I didn't think it was really an advantage. I just thought I was confused. So why do you think it was an advantage that you had no idea what you wanted to do?
I think. Look, it's all sort of through the lens looking backwards versus at the time. I think at the time I probably wouldn't have said it was an advantage. At the time I was just confused and realized I was spending a lot of money on a degree and I should probably figure out what the heck I was trying to do with it quickly. But no, I think looking backwards, where it was an advantage is it meant that I actually got to ask questions and take advantage of having 2 years of time where I was still moving my career forward. But had the optionality to try to figure out what did I actually want to do, who did I want to be, and have a lot of people who were willing to take my phone calls. So that first year of grad school, I think I made it, 2 or 3 weeks in before I realized that it was going to be an expensive way to pass time if I didn't figure out what I wanted to do. And sports had always been something I was passionate about. So brilliant, I should have a career in sports, which turns out to be less straightforward than I thought when I first had that idea. And I had about 150 informational interviews my first year of business school, talking to literally anyone and everyone I could get to talk to me, both about understanding the sports landscape. I started thinking it was mostly teams, leagues, college conferences. It's a lot more than that. And then really working to refine my story and help figure out what I could do and where my place in the industry might be, where I could get sort of a foothold in. So again, I think in the moment, it was really scary. I graduated without a job. I can talk about that in a little bit, but it was really scary while I was going through it. But I think I got the opportunity to look at the world and all of the different opportunities in it with a much clearer lens than if I'd gone in saying, I definitely want to do X or I definitely want to do Y, because I didn't know about a lot of the opportunities that actually were out there.
So how many of you in the audience are athletes here, D1 athletes? Okay. You played soccer and you love sports, and so you thought, I'd like to go into sports, but you didn't know anybody, and there isn't, like at most schools, we're starting a sports program here, and I want to talk about that a little, but so you just started calling people and said, can I talk to you about, and you had 150 kind of chats?
It was a little bit more nuanced than that. So I played soccer through high school. I was not good enough to be a D1 athlete. I would describe myself as a solidly mediocre all-around athlete. I can do almost any sport fine, and that's about it. But it was always something that I enjoyed from the perspective of being a fan and being a part of something and having a sense of community with family, friends, and the people sort of in the towns that I lived in, and having sort of a shared passion for something. So for me, that was what was really appealing about it. Really, what I very quickly figured out was, as much as I wanted to work in sports, sports was not completely convinced it wanted me to work in sports. So I had been a strategy consultant straight out of college. I had switched over to an agency that did a lot of marketing, consulting in the media and entertainment space. So that was my background going into business school. Sports, particularly at that time, I would say less so now, but still, it's an industry that I would describe it as an apprenticeship style industry, where a lot of people start in at the very ground floor and they work their way up. There are, particularly at the teams in the leagues, there are finite number of roles, and people who tend to get them often don't leave, which means it's really hard to come in at a more senior level. And frankly, it can be hard to progress without moving around, just because it's hierarchy, right? There are relatively fewer roles as you go up, and there are relatively finite organizations, and someone might sit in that director seat for 20 or 30 years, which means that you could be incredible, but there's just not a seat to go into. So it really was, I started, I think, with the Tuck alumni base and the Dartmouth alumni base, and reaching out saying, hi, I'm a student at Tuck, and I'd like to work in sports. Would you be willing to share your experience with me? I think I came pretty close to tapping both of those networks, which are large. And then I got a lot better at asking the question at the end of the call of, is there anyone else with whom you think I should speak? Which was very scary for me the first times, because I felt like I was being presumptuous. Turns out that people will make some polite sort of muttering around, oh, well, let me think about it and I'll get back to you, if they don't want to, or if they don't have anyone. But more often than not, you can get a good answer, and someone might say, hey, actually, I've got a friend who's doing this thing. I think they'd be good for you. But ultimately, it really was trying to understand what the landscape was and broadening it from teams, leagues, conferences to, oh, wait, there are a bunch of agencies, some that represent the athletes themselves, some that are working with different brands, and how do they engage from a marketing standpoint. They're the brands that are engaging from a marketing standpoint in the first place. They're all of the media entities around it, which are both television but also digital, and social wasn't as big of a thing at that point in time, but since expanded into social media. It's all of the companies that create sporting equipment and service the industry. And so it really was just an opportunity for me to hear from a variety of people about what are the roles in or connected to the sports space, and ultimately getting to a place where I could tell my story and figure out what are the things that I had done that actually would make me a compelling candidate. Because the reality is there was nothing in my background that was going to stand out if I had applied to the Baltimore Orioles at that point in time, because there are lots of people who had baseball resumes. There were lots of people who had specific skill and expertise and relationships that I just didn't have.
Another thing that struck me in what you said was that particularly early in your career, you were in a lot of roles where you didn't feel qualified. And I see this a lot in women in particular, particularly young women. I mean, I've had jobs throughout my life that I'm not qualified for, maybe including, a lot of people think Dean, but like, why do you feel like you weren't qualified, and then how did you overcome that feeling?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Qualified is a funny word, right? Because when you start a new job, ostensibly you shouldn't have done that job before, right? Or there should be aspects about it that are new to you. And so if you want to say that the definition of qualification is I've done every aspect of this job before, like that'd be hard to have your career progress. With that being said, I think there have been a few places where I've made big jumps. So one example would be I had been at Turner for about 5 years. I'd had the privilege of working on a lot of different projects around the organization, had done a lot of different roles for them, but ultimately decided I was ready for a new challenge. And I actually called the person who gave me my very first internship in sports and said, hey, I saw this thing posted on your career website. It's got a different name on it from the agency that you were. He ran a company called Octagon, which is a big agency, and it's something called Future Sport and Entertainment. It's like, I have no idea what this futures thing is, but looking at it, there's a lot of media stuff. I think I'd be pretty good at it. And he stopped. He's like, laughing. He's Katie, this is a company that exists in the UK and in Australia. It's got no footprint here in the US. There are no employees and there are no clients. This is a sales job and growing a business job. Have you ever sold anything? It's like, no, but I'm pretty sure I could figure it out. And I was very fortunate that he was willing to give me a chance at figuring it out. And it was scary for anyone who doesn't have sales experience, get sales experience. It's terrifying. But I think getting good at it, regardless of whether you want to be in sales, is a massive talent and a massive skill, and frankly gives you a lot better empathy and appreciation for the other coworkers inside your organization. But that was one where he took a leap of faith on me. I'd worked with him before. He knew that I'm pretty good at figuring things out. He gave me a chance. It went really well. Fast forward a few years, I got a call from a headhunter. I was living in Atlanta at the time, and he said, hey, you familiar with Atlanta United? It was 2017. I'd actually been to their inaugural match back in March, and this was probably April. I said, yeah. It's a new soccer team. She's like, yeah, they're looking for someone to run their business. I was like, that's cool. She talks through it, and I was like, well, the way this job description lays out, it looks like you're looking for a marketing person. She's like, well, no, we need a business person. I'm like, well, here are the things that I think I could bring to the table, but I'm not a marketing person. So if that's what you want, I'm probably not your person. Fast forward, ultimately, turns out they didn't want a marketing person, and they gave me a shot, but this was opening Mercedes-Benz Stadium. It was putting on events for 70,000+ people. I had no experience doing that, and it was a much larger team as well. But again, I think it's a place where you're building on skills that you've already had. You're building on relationships you have, and if you're willing to pick up the phone, phone a friend, ask for help, and admit what you don't know, and figure it out from there, it can go just fine. But again, it required taking a leap of faith and going from a job that had been really hard, that I'd finally sort of figured out how to do, and it was finally getting easier. And it was an opportunity to dive back into something that was going to be really hard, and I wasn't sure if I would succeed or not. And I did it. And then when the Mariners came up, I was actually qualified for that one. I'd done a lot of the stuff that they were looking for, but it was a much bigger platform. And that one was scary because at the time I took it, there were exactly 0 women running baseball teams. I was younger than all of the other presidents. I'd never worked in baseball. And I was terrified that even though I actually felt reasonably qualified for the role, that if I screwed it up, like in my job, you screw it up, you get fired, it's public, it's super embarrassing. All of that I could deal with. I wouldn't like it, but I could deal with it. What was really scary was being the poster child for this is why you don't hire a woman to do this job for the next decade. That was actually probably the biggest mental hurdle, going from one role to another. That was the scariest part. It was scarier than not knowing how to do something, because I'm really good at figuring things out. But it worked out. And ultimately, by the time I had the opportunity with the Orioles, I was qualified, and that was no longer a point of fear for me, which means that I had the opportunity to come in and actually just hit the ground running, which has been fun.
So now you're running one of the most storied franchises in the history of any sport. It's got one of the best ballparks in the world. Tell us your job. So you run the business, and then Mike Elias runs the baseball. Just describe how it works.
Yeah, I think the easiest way to describe it is if it involves the players, right? So talent identification, are from our Dominican Academy, minor league scouting, collegiate scouting, pro scouting, international scouting, player development, training, coaching from the minor league staff up through the major league staff, or the analytics around what swing do you actually, or which pitch do you actually swing at, et cetera. That's all Mike and his team. Mike and my peer, he and I work very, very closely together, but everything else falls into my world. So it's everything from some of the normal stuff like back office, HR, finance, legal, technology, managing the P&L for the entire business, but also stadium operations, marketing, all of the sales related to it. I run our television network, ballpark ops, running our facilities down in Florida, all construction and CapEx improvements. Yeah, basically anything that's not the players.
So one of the challenges of your job is your job is to increase revenue, grow sales, increase tickets, but you have no control over the product. So last year, for example, the O's were great. They made it to the playoffs. Sadly,
2 years ago.
Didn't work out. This year, the injuries were terrible. I think 4 of the top 5 pitchers were out for a while, a lot of the position players, and so they had a terrible year. So ticket sales went down, I think, 6,000 per game or so-ish. So, how do you manage the fact that you're responsible for revenue, but you don't control what you're selling?
It's really fun. No, look, I think the reality is when you're looking at sports and you're looking at it from a team standpoint, you are going to have variability tied to team performance. That is a statement of fact. That is not an excuse. It is just a reality. However, one of the things that you can do on the business side is effectively raise the floor and be in a position where when things are good, you turbocharge that ceiling, right? And so I think that the way that I always look at my job is about how do I inflect the curve, right? It's not about pretending it doesn't exist, but it is about inflecting it. This season was hard. It sucks. Anyone who thinks losing is fine and that the people working for teams don't care, I assure you, you're misguided. People don't work for teams for the money. People work for teams because they love what they do. You've got a ton of the biggest fans of the organization are the people who work inside of it, and all of us hate losing. I joke with Mike all the time that if he tells me what he needs, I will do my best to figure it out, because ultimately we are going to be successful when we are successful on the field. That is something where I can play a big role. But with that being said, our core product is humans. Our core product, moreover, are roughly 20-something-year-old men. And I can't speak for 20-something-year-old men because I've never been one, but I can speak as a formerly 20-something-year-old female, and I was not the most reliable human at all times during that era of my life. The reality is our players are also people who have real lives challenges, and to your point on injuries, that is a reality of the game that we're facing right now. They're particularly among pitching staffs. We are going through an injury epidemic on that side. That's a real challenge, starting with the point that, again, these are people who are injured. It's not just about is your team winning or losing. It's like they're real people who are really injured and really hurting. And so for us, I think, again, it's not making excuses, but it is doing the things you can to reinforce sort of what are the revenues that are relatively less tied into team performance and less variable based on team performance, and what are the things you can do to shore those up while also making choices to try to put yourself in a position to succeed as things are performing at a higher level, which we anticipate they will soon.
Let's talk about what you're selling. So Ted Leonsis, who owns the Wizards and the Caps and the Mystics, put out a tweet last week, which was interesting. He said that we're not in the business of sports. We're in the business at the nexus of tech, media, and entertainment. So, and then I re-listened to your interview with A-Rod this morning, and you really talked about you're selling an experience. So what is it that you're selling?
I think it comes back to people, right? The reason, it's sort of what I talked about earlier about the reason I love sports, like super cheeseball. But at the end of the day, we're in the business of bringing people together. We get to unite communities and create a space where millions of people sit next to each other, and your very first thought is not, oh, I'm looking at you. Here are the 16 things that we have that make us different, and therefore I'm not going to engage with you. The point of encounter is a shared high five over a home run by Gunnar Henderson, right? It's places where people come together, and it's places where ultimately at our best we bring joy. Sometimes we bring frustration, but we try to bring joy. So for me, it really is we're in the community business. We're in the placemaking business. We do extend beyond that, and I think to his point, like technology and entertainment are playing increasingly large roles in creating experiences that are more inclusive, right? Like there's some people who want to come to a game. They want to sit behind home plate. They want to keep score the whole game. They're paying attention to every pitch, every play. That's awesome. There's some people who want to go and have a beer and hang out with their friends and maybe tune in every once in a while. That has to be okay too. We need to be able to create spaces where it's not about us telling you how to watch a baseball game. It's about you coming and engaging with us in a way that feels right to you. And it's also recognizing we have 81 times a year, hopefully more, when we're not home. And so then the question is, how do we create a point of continuity where our fans have the opportunity to engage with us in a way that makes sense for them? And that's likely going to be via some form of media or some form of technology. And so how do we meet our fans where they are and engage with them in a way that they want to engage with us versus trying to tell them what to do?
One of the things that I spend a lot of time kind of talking to students about is what you mentioned earlier, that as the more senior you go, the more you're going to be doing sales every day. And then the other thing is to be a storyteller, to create a narrative. And when you were talking to A-Rod, you said that one of the things that MLB needs to do better is tell the story of the players, their narrative, and maybe the NBA has done a little better, but just talk about the art of creating those narratives, making them compelling, and how that draws in communities.
Well, it's interesting. I think if you take a step back and you think about the different leagues and the things that they do well and the things that perhaps they do less well, the role of fantasy football cannot be overstated for the NFL. Right? It gives you a reason to care whether or not your team is playing, because most of the time your team is not playing, right? And so this is something where in terms of getting engagement, they can rely on the role of fantasy football. It's something that works really well for them. When you think about the NBA, you have individual players that often supersede the teams from a brand standpoint, right? It's someone where it's like, oh my gosh, I mean, Kobe was transcendent. LeBron was transcendent. Michael Jordan was transcendent. You have a number of other players that are coming onto the scene that really are players that regardless of where you live and what team you may root for when they're home, like these are players you want to see. These are players you want to tune in to. These are players that you're following because they're cool, because they're talented. Baseball players are also actually cool and talented, as it turns out. We just haven't told their story nearly as well. And part of the challenge is when you think about baseball, you know, we hear a lot like, well, why aren't your players out in the community more? Why aren't they doing more? These are guys who are playing 162 games in roughly 190 days, a little less. That's bonkers. They're traveling for half of that time. Many of them have families. Even those who don't have like wives, girlfriends, kids, they have friends. They have things that they want to do in their own lives. And so once the season starts, in fairness to these folks, like I wouldn't want to take my one day off in a 3-week period where I'm home and necessarily go out and do something. And that's not because I don't care about the community. That's not because I don't want to engage with our fans. It's because I'm tired, right? And so we don't have as many opportunities to do things as we would if we, like NFL, you've got just a lot fewer games. Even NHL and NBA have as many games as we do. And so I think part of what has happened is we haven't really taken the time to help our fans get to know our players. Because I think one of the things that's cool as someone who's had the privilege of getting to know a lot of them, they're relatable. Right? These are guys where some of them are bombastic. They're out there. They're your sort of prototype athlete, superstar type molds. A lot of them are guys where it's like, I could see grabbing a beer with him. Like, oh my gosh, he reminds me of my friend, my cousin, my son, my uncle, whoever it is. But there's a way to connect to these players. And I think ultimately, as humans, we look to connect. Right? We look to find the person where we have something in common with them. Because then it's not well, Gunnar sucks. He struck out 3 times today. It's like, Gunnar's my man. Gunnar's my boy. Like, I care about him. He'll come back. Right? But it helps create that tie because over the course of 162 games, Every single athlete is going to go through peaks and valleys. That's like, again, if you think about yourself as a human, I don't show up at my best every single day. I try to, but some days suck. And players are no different. And so having those relationships with our fans and creating a place where they actually relate to our players as people and not sports robots is really important. Because again, that is one of the things that will allow us to help get through those periods when things aren't going as well as we want them to go and as our players want them to go.
Let's talk about women in sports, in the business of sports. So we were talking, I think there are 128 professional teams of the 4 major men's leagues: football, basketball, baseball, hockey. And I think we counted 6 that are run by women. Okay. So why is sports so far behind, and what challenges have you faced reaching the big time in sports as a woman?
So I think some of it ties back to what I talked about early on, which is when you look at those senior level roles, like half of my peers among presidents of Major League Baseball teams have been with those teams for 30 plus years, right? That's not because they're unqualified. Like a lot of them are really talented, really good at what they do, but these seats do not open up often. And when you think about pipelines, you know, one of the reasons we spend so much time and energy at the Orioles thinking about who are we bringing in when we have new roles and making sure that we have diverse candidates is because it's really hard to have more diversity further up the pipe if everyone coming in at a certain level looks the same. And again, this isn't we're at an interesting point in time when we talk about diversity, but this isn't even about the politically correct, oh, it's good to have diversity. It is about the reality is we are out there trying to create a product that appeals to our entire community. Our entire community is full of diverse people. So if every single person who works for the organization has a similar background, that probably means we're going to have blind spots about how do we best connect with other people, right? So looking at the industry as a whole, I think the reality is you had that apprenticeship model. You come in at the bottom, you work your way up. Most of the people who came in at the bottom for a very, very long time were white men. Like, that's not bad. It's just a statement of fact of where things were 30 years ago, right? And as things are continuing to change, the reality is there's not enough in the pipeline. And until fairly recently, you haven't necessarily had ownership groups who are looking to think more outside of the box in terms of bringing in people from the outside. And when you don't have pipeline inside your business, the only way you're going to get sort of different points of view is going outside. But if you're not doing that, we're back to where we started. So I think that's just a sort of an observation of where we are. It's getting better, but slowly. In terms of me, I don't know that I faced any major hurdles. Like I think I said differently, I was my biggest hurdle. Like I already mentioned sort of the way in which I was thinking about that first role with the Mariners. That was really scary. But I've had a lot of advocates. I've had a lot of people who have pushed me, who have encouraged me, some of whom are women, most of whom are men, because most of the people with whom I'm working have been men. And the reality is having relationships with people who push you and believe in you and encourage you is really ultimately what matters and what has helped me be as successful as I've been. But I will say one slightly funny story from when I first started at the Mariners. I was at my first owners meeting, so it's owners of all the 30 teams plus presidents. I was beyond intimidated. I stood out like a sore thumb. And the third day I was there, someone came across the room as I was grabbing coffee and said, "You must be Catie. Welcome to baseball. I've heard great things. There's no gotcha on this story." Then he stopped himself. He looked at me and said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I should have introduced myself. My name's Derek Jeter." I knew who Derek Jeter was. He was very nice, but I called my husband soon afterwards and said, "Hey babe, I was just in the only room in America where Jeter could pick me out of a crowd." And it's true. And I think some of it is you have to be comfortable if you're in an environment where your background is different. And by the way, your background could be different even if you look similar to a lot of people. Whenever you enter those rooms and have an opportunity to be there, like some of it is just getting out of your own way and not looking at yourself through the lens of everyone else and saying, "Oh, they must all be looking at me and saying, oh, what the heck is this little girl doing there?" I may be the one telling myself that story, And if someone else is thinking, F them.
Okay, that's the quote of the day. Let's talk about the off-season, and then I want to pivot to students and how to break in, and then we'll open up. So 2 big things in the off-season. One is getting some new players, maybe some pitchers, and then the other is some major renovations investments. So do you want to tell anybody here in secret, like who you're going to acquire in the off-season?
You've been practicing, right?
Yes, exactly. And then what are the major, so what are the biggest needs to take the team to the next level? And then what are you doing to make one of the best venues in the world even better?
So on the first front, I'm going to entirely defer to my friend Mike Elias because it turns out he's really good at this stuff. And so I'm not going to get in his way. But what I will tell you is, as with anything, it's funny. Don't believe what you read until you hear it from us, like legitimately. Rumors are out there all the time about different things for different reasons. And they're started by all sorts of different people, which is always fascinating to me, having spent a long time on the communication side at this point. But ultimately, it's about putting together not just skills, which are critical, like you need pitching as an example, but also personalities. Because again, you are creating a team. And while baseball is unique in that it's a series of individual actions where every single one is outcome-based, you caught the ball, you didn't catch the ball. You ran, you didn't run. You got to the base, you got hit the ball, you struck out, what have you. But it really is about putting together the right group of guys where you've got not only the skills but the chemistry. And so I think the team is always looking at that. And poor Mike, his side of the world is so dynamic. It moves so fast. You have 30 teams fighting over very, very scarce resources. And so conversations move quickly, and 1 minute may look like you've got something, and the next minute you hear that the player is signing somewhere else. So we are in a chaotic period of time. I think this is going to be an active offseason for us. But exactly where we're going to land, I don't dare to guess at this juncture. I'll just be ready to take care of the guys when they're coming on board and make sure that our fans are getting excited about them. In terms of...
Can I just press you a little on this? Okay,
so look, I won't answer.
You have 2 great catchers.
We do.
Your infield is spectacular. Maybe some pitching and maybe some, I know Matt Rogers is here. He's got some views. And
I think pitching would be helpful. How about that? I think pitching would be helpful. We can talk bullpen, we can talk starters, we can talk closers, but pitching would be helpful. But no, I think on the part that I can control is on the capital side. So this is on 2 different fronts. So we actually are doing 3 major construction projects right now. We have, in smallest to largest dollars, roughly a sort of $10-ish million project to completely gut our offices. Which you might be like, why the hell are you spending money on your offices? Don't you need to spend money on other things? And the answer is yes. Yes, and. We have offices that have not been touched since the 80s.
This is the warehouse.
The warehouse, yeah. And the reason that that's actually important is from a cultural standpoint inside the organization. One of the things that we're really working towards is we're never going to win on the field or off by behaving like the Yankees or the Mets or any of the big market teams, because we're not, right? But that's not an excuse. It just means that we get to win by being the Orioles. And some of that is going to be, we're going to be leaner, we're going to be nimble, we're going to have to work together more effectively and have people who are being encouraged to think outside of a very, very small box. But to do that, you actually have to see people. You have to be able to share ideas, you have to be able to communicate, you have to actually have transparency. And we're coming from an environment that was very siloed, both from a cultural standpoint, but also physically. And so part of what we're doing is trying to create an environment inside our offices where people actually talk to each other. Because we have a lot of really talented men and women who work for our organization, and just because you're in ticket sales, as an example, doesn't mean that you don't have thoughts or ideas that might be incredible from a marketing standpoint. Or just because you're on ballpark operations doesn't mean you couldn't have that next great corporate partnership idea. So we're working on that project. That's the smallest project. We also have a roughly $25 million project going in our spring training facility. So we've got an incredible space down in Sarasota, Florida. Our ballpark's incredible. The player side was less so. I think the batting cages had actually been condemned, and then we did just enough to keep them usable for one more season. That's not exactly the type of environment we want to have world-class athletes in, and so we are putting in a state-of-the-art new facility for them down there, incorporating a lot of technology that is really becoming omnipresent throughout baseball in terms of allowing us to have the best data on our athletes and get the best data for them to help them be at their best. So that is being built and will be in place for the start of spring training, where we got our WBC pitchers and catchers reporting on February 9th. So no problem, we'll get there. Far and away the biggest project we have is roughly $250 million at Camden Yards that we have 6 months to finish the project. Don't do that, it's not a good idea, but we will get it done. But Camden Yard is an incredible ballpark. Hopefully most of you have had the opportunity to come. If you haven't, you should. But similar to our offices, it's a facility that opened up in '92 that has in many cases not been touched. We had the smallest video board in Major League Baseball. If you came during a day game, you probably couldn't see what was happening because the contrast was so bad. Our audio system, when I first got there, sounded like you basically had Charlie Brown's teacher going, "Now going," like you couldn't hear anything that was going on. And a lot of the spaces that are traditional at almost any venue at this juncture, whether they're social viewing areas or whether they are premium spaces that allow for us to actually create the revenue streams to ensure that we can continue having seats at $15, we just didn't have them. So this offseason, we're building a new club space that's all-inclusive. It's small. It's roughly 350 seats. We're building that new space. It'll be the first time we've had a space like that to use at Camden Yards. We're building a new large group viewing area under the new scoreboard that we're putting in. So we're gonna have a scoreboard that is not crazy large because I don't think, frankly, that would be appropriate for Camden Yards. But it puts us probably 16th or 17th in the league in terms of size of board. We'll have LED ribbon boards along the sides, which allows us to have a much more immersive experience as well as much better data for fans who are there and actually care about what's happening during the game. New sound system, which our players have been asking for, believe it or not, because they want to actually hear what's going on. IPTVs throughout the concourses, and then our club level has not been touched in, well, almost 30 years. And that space is also getting a facelift because, again, we have roughly 4,000 fans at that space where if you were not in a suite, you were either insized in a conditioned hallway that sort of could be in a hospital or any other venue, or you were outside in your seats. We're removing 10 suites to create 2 glassed-in bar spaces where, again, people can have different experiences. And then there's a lot of really sexy stuff like painting structural steel in a chiller plant. So if you have questions about that, just let me know.
Okay, 2 final questions. We are building a new business of sports program. Professor Bakovich is here. Professor Bloss-Baum is there. She runs our business entertainment. We've spent 3 years seeking advice from people. I just want to get your reaction. So we've talked to owners, people that run teams like Mark Murphy, who runs the Packers. We're trying to build an elite, small program rooted in business. And at the bottom line is, Mark Murphy told me, he said, we get 1 million applications for people that like football, they played it growing up, they watch a lot of football, and they think, oh, I'll go work in football. I want to hire people that are grounded in the fundamentals of accounting, finance, marketing, core business, that have on top of that some experience studying the business of entertainment or sports, plus internships. So does that sound right to you, wrong to you? What do you look for when you're hiring young people?
Yeah, I think that's fairly similar to what I would say. One of the things on probably informational interviews 1 through 20 that I figured out was starting with I'm a big fan was not the way to start my calls. No one cared why I wanted to work in sports. They kind of assumed that I did or I wouldn't have called them. What they wanted to know was how was I going to solve whatever problem they had as a business. And so I now do probably 100 plus informational interviews every year because I very much believe in paying this one forward for a very long time. But a lot of what I tell people is I think there's also huge value in understanding what you're getting into. Sports are amazing. I feel incredibly privileged to get to do what I do. It's a job. And there is a cost of turning the thing that you love into the thing you get paid to do, right? And that's not, again, I would make the trade over and over again, but it's a very real thing. I used to know every score of every game across all of the leagues, all of the players, what was happening. I don't even know our own record half the time. I just know how many games we are clear of the playoff line or not, because that is a massive impact on my life. And by the time I get done with the week, the last thing I want to watch is another sporting event. And it's, and it's sad because this is something that I love, but it is now all I do and all I think about all day, every day, and most nights. And so again, I think it's important as people who are looking to come into sports, know what they're looking to do. Know why they're looking to work into sports. What is it about the sports industry that makes it different for you versus working in entertainment, versus working in CPG, versus working in tech, right? Because ultimately, a lot of the roles and the functions are similar. Like accounting is accounting. You're just doing it in a different environment. Marketing is marketing. Now, mind you, who you're talking to and what you're selling is totally different. But again, I think a lot of it is that awareness and understanding of what does it mean to work in sports? And that's where those internships, I think, can play a really important role.
Okay, last question. A lot of students here, a lot of former athlete or current athletes, business students, and how do they break in? What's your advice to them? Pretend there's an informational interview.
Happy to. I think, look, it's sometimes the fastest way to get to where you want to go isn't a straight line. If I had come in when I was working on my MBA and said, I want to work for a team. It never occurred to me to be the president of a Major League Baseball team. That would have been hilariously laughable when I was in grad school. But even if I had said, hey, I want to work for a team, I could have sent my application into every single team for every single opening they ever had, and I may or may not have gotten my foot in the door, right? I could have gotten lucky eventually, but a lot of it's timing. Right? It's not about you. Is there the right role? By the way, we were talking about this, so we have a couple of roles that are open right now that we've got over 1,000 applications for. We can't look at 1,000 resumes. Yes, with AI, you can get better, but that's not necessarily where you want to be either. A lot of it is, have you built those relationships with folks where you're having informational interviews, so when a job opens up, I'm not going to say, oh yeah, definitely I'm going to hire you. But I might say, let me make sure that your resume gets looked at. Because if your resume never gets looked at, it's really hard to get the job, right? And so part of it is about having those conversations in advance. Part of it is also potentially being open to, okay, I'm passionate about working in sports. I'd really love to work in baseball. But there's a sports agency that's got a job where I'm actually really well qualified, or I have a relationship and can get my foot in the door in there. It's a lot easier to move around in the industry once you actually have it on your resume, once you start building out your network. And so again, that's not to sort of discourage you from applying and saying, hey, this is my dream job, this is what I want to do. Awesome. Go for it. But it may be, like the reality is in team sports in particular, the most roles that get open every single year are in ticket sales. That is where most of the jobs are, just like volume, that's where they end up doing. You may not want to be in ticket sales for an entire career. And if you're going to completely hate it, do not try to apply for those jobs, because they will find out that you are only doing it to get in, and you probably won't get the job because they do actually need you to do the job. But ultimately, it may be that, hey, you know what? Maybe this isn't where I want to end up long term, but this is an opportunity for me to get my foot in the door, learn about the industry, start building out my network and demonstrating, hey, I've got some really good ideas. So when that marketing manager role opens up, I have a really good story to tell, and I have people who are going to vouch for me. Right? So again, I think some of it is just thinking about it through the lens of how do you build your network, even if, like me, I knew no one. But now I know a lot of people, right? So how do you start having those conversations before you need them, and how do you start looking at the world a little bit more broadly? Even if you've got a dream job, figuring out what is that 1 degree of separation type roles that can help you get back sort of on course with a stronger foundation for job number 2 or number 3.
Great. Okay, so let's open it up. Just introduce yourself, tell us what you study, and ask your question. Who wants to go first? We have a mic coming.
Hi, my name is Matthias. I'm a broadcast journalism and business admin double major. My question is, when I first went to Camden Yards for my first game, they had really cool, in-game experiences, right? They had, O's alumni on a Friday night. They had, cheap concessions. How do you, A, like come up with these ideas, and B, like compete with the rest of the MLB to like keep your fan engagement on top?
Yeah, so I think coming up with good ideas is, thankfully I don't. I come up with a few, but mostly I have really smart people who work across the organization. I think, like I said earlier, one of the things that helps us be best is when we make sure that you don't have to work in marketing to have a good idea, and how do we actually create that pipeline for good ideas to get into the system. It's interesting, as you mentioned about competing with Major League Baseball. I generally don't. I don't, like, if on the field, you know, we're in there to win. Off the field, I have relationships with every other team, and we spend a lot of time calling each other. I was actually literally on the drive down here talking to someone over at the White Sox because they're working on something and they wanted to talk through it. You know, I think the reality is, particularly when you look at sort of Major League Baseball, all of us on the business side have the same goal, which is how do we grow the sport? How do we help generate more fans? And if there are more fans for the Washington Nationals, that's probably not bad for us at the Orioles. Now, I'd like them to be Orioles fans. But with that being said, like, what I really care about is, do people care about baseball, right? Because if you care about baseball, I'll get you to be an Orioles fan. I'll get you at Camden Yards. We don't really compete with each other. We actually do a lot of best practice sharing. There were meetings last week in New York where all of the marketing teams for all 30 clubs came together to really just do exactly that. But it's interesting. I think when we think about who do we compete with, I compete with your couch. Like, that's probably my number one competitor, because it's a heck of a lot easier and cheaper to sit on your couch and watch a game or watch Netflix or play video games than to come to the ballpark, right? So it's really about, how do we think about what are the reasons that people are choosing to take action or choosing not to take action, and creating a counterpoint that is strong enough to compel them to say, hey, this is something where I not only want to spend my money, but also my time doing this.
Next question.
Hi, my name's Annabelle. I'm a business and entertainment major, and I'm also on the women's lacrosse team. You kind of touched on making sure that the players were relatable with the fans. What are some of the best ways that you do that?
It's humanizing them. Like, they are people, right? All of our guys have their own quirks, the same way I'm sure every single person in this room has their quirks, right? Like, it's funny, I was in the room, and I will not name names. So we were going through a brand relaunch with some of our players and talking through it. And talking about, and one of the questions I got was like, well, I don't know if this is us. And I was like, okay, well, what are you? He's like, I don't know, we're kind of boring. I'm like, excellent, thank you, that's really great for me to market. But really what he meant was the things that they like doing are the same things that I suspect most people in this room like doing. Like, they like going out to eat. Like, half of them are super into Star Wars and Legos. They all play too many video games, right? Like, they're normal people, and so how do we help highlight the parts of their personalities that make them relatable, right? That make them feel more like us, because they are like us. And so it really is about shining that spotlight on the things that they do and the reasons that they're sort of who they are and the relationships that they have off the field, as much as the incredible things that they do on it.
I'm not used to speaking with the mic. Can you guys hear me? So my name's Maggie Heffernan. Thank you so much for being here. This is incredible. I'm a first-year MBA student. Most of my peers are not looking to necessarily go into the intersection of sports and business. So I'm thrilled to see a woman at the top really being here. It's incredible. So I'm also interested at the intersection of sports and sustainability, which is pretty niche, and some people look at me like I'm cross-eyed when I say that. I'm wondering what the Orioles or MLB in general might be doing in terms of like ESG efforts. And for me, not just traditionally the environmental efforts, but the social and governance factors, like trying to get more women to the top of organizations, or like socially within organizations, just treating their players and their employees better.
Yeah. No, I think I don't think you're cross-eyed. There actually are, both on the team level and league levels, a lot of efforts underway. Now, again, we are at a unique point in time in terms of a lot of the work that was going on that was more front and center. I think you're seeing different words being used, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the work isn't being done. You know, as I mentioned, I can only speak for our organization and the Mariners when I was there, and the Atlanta United. when I was there, and I know that it still remains important in those organizations as well. Like for us, it isn't about female leadership, although I would think as 50% of the population, it makes sense that you have representation, more representation of women. I think it's more about like diverse experiences, like truly making sure, like, do we have people, like if you look at my leadership team, I'm trying to think if I can do this off the top of my head, 2 African-American males, 4 women, and 1 Latina, who's women, well, female, but also Spanish, grew up Spanish-speaking, Mexican-American. You know, but part of that was not just about, ooh, let me have this rainbow-colored coalition around me. It was about, how do I have people who represent our community? How do I have people who look at the world differently? And oh, by the way, I have a number of white men who work for me as well. They're all different. They all bring different experiences. So again, I think it's about telling that story, and the more that we can demonstrate success, I think the more willing others and open others are to saying, oh, wait, there is value in actually thinking differently. There is value in making sure that as we're bringing in a cohort of leaders, or even a cohort of people earlier in their careers, that we're bringing in people who better reflect the communities we serve, right? And so I think we're seeing progress in that way, but it's different organizations are in different places, to be blunt on it. From a sustainability standpoint on the environmental side, there's a lot of work that goes on, particularly around stadium operations. Like that is a space where for almost all of us, whether it's on the architectural and design and development standpoint, because there are a lot of new venues that are coming out there, that is a core tenet. A lot of them, like when I was at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, we were LEED Platinum. A lot of new organizations are really going for those LEED certifications and are trying to figure out how do you actually have waste management, how do you reduce, how do you have better, like water actually is a massive one, water use and water filtration, and how do you actually reuse dirty water. So there's a lot of work in that area. And then from an employee treatment standpoint, I think, frankly, sports is no different than anyone. We all want to be treating our employees well. And so there's just, I think that's your people and culture departments and looking at it from a landscape of what are the things that we need, right? Because it turns out all of us have jobs. So what are the roles that we have and what are the expectations? How do we clearly communicate those? And then how do we set people up for success? Recognizing that what makes a person good at his or her job is going to be a combination of the skills that they bring, but also the perspectives that they add to the rest of the organization.
The other thing, if you want to go into sports, it's hard. I'm lucky enough to be involved with the Orioles, my former anyway, I go to the box, owner's box, and on a Tuesday night, Catie's there. She's working. So she's worked from 8 in the morning until 6:30 or 7, and then she's at the game with her team and walking around looking to make sure the popcorn's the right place and what the lines are doing. It's hard work. It's long hours. So if you want to do this, just be prepared. So over here, and then we had some more in the back.
Hello, my name is Adam. I'm a business entertainment major here at Kogod. I know that visiting Camden Yards and being a fan of the Orioles is synonymous with visiting downtown Baltimore and having pride in the city and whatever. As a Baltimore native, I know when the Orioles win, so does the city. So I'm curious, how do you see your business fitting into the tourism of Baltimore and Baltimore's national image?
Yeah, I think it actually plays a big role, and I've got a good relationship with the Ravens as well, and we talk about this a lot. I think Baltimore is a unique community because I keep hearing small market. I think it's a mid-market, right? But when you think about the brands that are intrinsically linked with Baltimore, it's really the O's, the Ravens, and Under Armour, right? Like there are a bunch of other incredible companies around as well. I think, but those 3 carry a disproportionate share, and of those 3, the O's have been around the longest. And one of the things that makes us unique as an organization is we've always been a city center team. Right? You're seeing a increasing number of clubs that are moving out to more suburban areas where there's larger footprints available. We are in a new ballpark, built in 1992, but we came from an inner city neighborhood. We remain in a center city neighborhood. You have public transit. You have the ability to bring people together, and it really does, for a city like Baltimore, create this euphoria when things are going well, and it's interesting. Like, apparently the Ravens are totally back in it now, which is amazing. But if you looked at the earlier part of September, you would have thought that the world was ending because the O's weren't doing what we were supposed to. The Ravens weren't doing what they were supposed to, and Baltimore was pissed. And so I think when we're looking about the role that we play in our community, it really is creating those spaces and helping energize that downtown. We talk about it a lot. One of the things that's interesting about baseball is, this year we had a relatively crappy year, like calling a spade, we had a relatively crappy year. We still had nearly 2 million people come to Camden Yards, okay? So when you think about the role that these organizations play, many of those people lived within driving distance of the ballpark, but we actually have a fairly large tourism business in terms of people who are coming in to come to see a game at Camden Yards for one of two reasons. One, because it's bucket list ballpark, because we are one of the name ballparks in Major League Baseball. And then you've got a lot of folks who are coming in because, hey, it's easy to get here from New York. It's easy to get here from Philly. It's easy to get here from Boston or anywhere else, frankly. So we do play a role in terms of how do we help fill hotel nights, how do we help make sure that we're creating businesses and basically helping support the entire industry. We also have more than 1,000 men and women who work at the ballpark on game days, and so most of whom are from Baltimore City Central. So we are a major employer, and I think that's something we actually don't talk about all that much, but it turns out with 81 games over that period of time, it actually is, for many people, a very full-time job, right? And this is a livable wage, full-time job downtown for a lot of these people. So we play that role as well. I think, I had the privilege when I was in Seattle of hosting the All-Star Game and then hosting the NHL Winter Classic. And one of the reasons that those events were so important for in Seattle is, if you guys want to take a trip in the Wayback Machine towards COVID, Seattle's reputation was not great. Okay, Seattle had some real challenges over that time from a national storytelling standpoint. It was taking its lumps in the media. And by bringing a national and international spotlight to the city through these major sporting events, we had an opportunity to tell a different story as a city. And I would argue we did it very, very well. I think Baltimore is in a similar spot where we have that opportunity for people to come and say, oh, like I may have read something. That's actually not the experience I had. And to the extent we were able to create a reason for people to come downtown where they have a positive experience, the better off we'll be, and hopefully we'll be able to have that national and international spotlight come on us fairly soon.
Just one piece of advice. I give this to every CEO or president. We had the CEO of Comcast. If you're here, you're actually showing something different as a student, okay? We have a big soccer game going on, semifinals. I hope we won. Anybody know the score? 0-0. We lost. Oh, okay. We'll post some LinkedIn of Catie being here. Take it, repost it, or add a comment. When you interview for a job or a internship, the fact that you were here talking to a leader of the sports industry is something that someone will see when they look at your LinkedIn profile that says, I care enough to go learn. So even a small thing like that can create that difference. So, okay, last question over here. Just introduce yourself. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kyle. I'm a business entertainment major. I was wondering how the players side of the business that Mike Elias runs relates to your side of the business through marketing and fan engagement.
We talk all the time. So a couple of different things. So some of it is, and it's interesting, so we just signed a new manager, right? And so there's the player side, but there's also the manager side, because it turns out when you're trying to figure out how do you work with the athletes themselves, like you need to work with them and figure out what they like, what they don't like, what their cadence is. But you also need to figure out how are we trying to work with them more broadly and what are the other demands on their time and how are we actually going to be setting them up for success on and off the field. And so a lot of our conversations really do revolve around just getting to know them. Like, you know, when we're talking about the role of community, like community is hugely important to us. Like we serve the people of Baltimore and the people of Maryland. We want to make sure that we are giving back to them everything that they are giving to us. So there are a lot of opportunities for our players to get involved. Some of them love going to the children's hospitals. Some of them get really bummed out by it and are really uncomfortable and don't know what to say. That's okay. That doesn't make them bad people, right? Some of them are much more comfortable in other environments. So it's understanding who's comfortable, who's uncomfortable. From a marketing standpoint, some of it is, and I'll give you a good example from the Mariners. So rewind, Cal Raleigh was not necessarily the bombastic forward personality. Logan Gilbert, one of our starters, also not necessarily a bombastic forward personality. If you tried to interview either one of them, you'd get a bunch of mumbles and they'd sort of look at the camera. It was very engaging. You put the two of them together, though, because they were roommates, they were buddies. You put the two of them together, and they're so much more relatable because they're relaxed and that you see the dynamic of the two of them, right? And so understanding from a standpoint, who are the guys where one-on-one, like that's just not their happy place. That's not where they're going to shine. Our business is always to put our athletes in a position where they're comfortable and where whatever it is that makes them special and makes them unique, we can celebrate it. Like our job is never to cut them down. It's never to do anything that's going to embarrass them. It's never to make them look bad. And so understanding them and working with our baseball operations team to know what are those things and then getting to know the guys themselves, that's really important. And it's also about understanding it's going to change over the course of the season, right? I don't know about you guys, but when you're kicking butt, it's a lot easier to be like, yeah, great, I'll do all the things. And then when you have some bad days and you're just like, no one talk to me, go away. I really hate everyone. So it's staying in the rhythm, staying in the business, and actually getting to have those conversations where the coaches are also like, hey, bro over here is getting a little bit too big for his britches. Let him hang out for just a few weeks. Maybe focus on these other guys, right? So it's really spending a lot of time just no different than anything else, building relationships, having conversations, and figuring out how do we all work together to achieve the same things.
Catie Griggs, thank you for being here, and thanks to all of you.